right, thanks so much, Ryan, for that awesome talk. Next up, we have Elisa Kreiss from UCLA. Elisa is an assistant professor at UCLA, where she directs the Koalas Lab. Previously, Elisa received her PhD from Stanford, where she worked on unifying tools from NLP, psycholinguistics, and HCI to investigate communication context for language use. Most recently, her work is centered around automatically generating image descriptions, which I learned from her are very different from captions. So hope she'll tell us about that. And yeah, without further ado, I'll hand it off to her to tell us about how communicative principles should shape human-centered AI for non-visual accessibility. Also, ask her about bananas.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you for the generous introduction. I'm very delighted to be here today. So in my talk today, I would like to take a step back and focus our attention on the way that we define and evaluate what we commonly refer to as the image captioning task. And specifically, I will show evidence that in order to build systems that seamlessly integrate with real-world user needs, we need to start treating tasks like this as communicative problems. The image captioning task, as we know it today, originated from the challenge of simplistic semantic concept matching. That is, matching the image of a dog with the concept dog. So fundamentally, this task is about saying things that are correct about an image. Put differently, we can conceptualize the origins of image description generation as aiming to solve the question, what can we say about an image? But with the emergence of very sophisticated and prolific vision language models, we now need to move this task to the fundamental pragmatic question of what should we say about an image? So what does that mean? So here's an example of the...
What, could you just click no on that little dialogue?
Yeah, I think I can.
I apologize.
No, that's all good. I just cannot see the mouse. Maybe we have to
Oh shoot, okay.
do
Sorry,
this for a
is
second.
complicated.
There it is. No. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Technology is your friend. There we go.
Assistive for the sighted.
All right. Is this good now?
Yes.
Great. So here's an example of the sophisticated image-based text that today's models can generate. So GPT-4V provided the following description for an image showing Barack Obama, namely, a man in a suit gestures while speaking with the US flag in the background. But crucially, there are many texts that could plausibly go with every individual image. Other truthful descriptions of the image are Barack Obama giving his last State of the Union address, or also a hand with an index finger pointing up, seemingly attached to a person who has their mouth open, teeth are visible. All correct. And this one-to-many mapping and the challenges that come with it is going to be the main focus of today's talk. Because choices on what to say and how to say it have significant consequences for when these models are put with real people into accessibility scenarios. And today I will present recent work that shows how useful image description generation needs to be shaped by two fundamental communicative goals. The communicative goal of the text itself and the communicative goal of the image. And in the first case, I will show how the task definition in generating accessibility descriptions hasn't previously been well defined and start addressing this disconnect with a new data set. And in the second case, we worked with blind and low vision participants as well as sighted participants to show that image description generation can't be treated as simply an image to text problem, but actually requires a more holistic view on the situational context. So let's start with the first one and what I mean by an image-based text's communicative goal, because it's sort of a mouthful. So let me take this image showing an educational sketch of a plant, explaining the various parts that make up this plant, and let's say we have encountered this image in the Wikipedia article on multimodal pedagogy, which is an approach to teaching that implements different modes of communication, including visual and linguistic. Now let's create, there we go. Now let's create an accessibility description for this image. Bring some dynamic movement into the talk. Okay, so maybe something like this. An educational sketch of a plant illustrating the shoot system, which is above the soil, and the root system, which is below the soil. The different parts of the plant are labeled to point out, for example, the plant's reproductive shoot, that is the flower, or the lateral roots. So this is one image-based text. But there's actually a second image-based text on this slide, and basically all images on Wikipedia have it. And it's the text below the image. So that's here. Example of complementing linguistic and visual information leading to learning benefits over unimodal approaches. In journalism jargon and library sciences, this is commonly called a caption. And the other image-based text is commonly called a description or visual description of the image. Now, both of these texts are indeed image-based texts, but they have very distinct communicative goals. Descriptions need to replace an image and therefore list all the relevant aspects of an image. Captions presuppose that the person already has access to the image content, and the caption simply complements that information with details like how the image relates to the broader context, who painted that picture, when was the image taken, etc. And importantly, one cannot play the role of the other, and only descriptions are really suitable for serving an accessibility goal. However, in AI, we're still largely treating all of these texts the same, often without considering how these tasks are fundamentally different. And in fact, it all falls under the same umbrella term of image captioning, the task of generating some linguistic text that is based on an image. So we're not currently choosing our data, models, and evaluations based on the distinct purposes the texts intend to achieve. So the hypothesis is that they are fundamentally different image-based texts, and if we don't pay attention to this distinction, resulting models will be misaligned with accessibility needs. So let's investigate this. So to investigate this distinction, we've introduced a Wikipedia-based dataset called Communicative, which contains images and their corresponding captions, as well as accessibility descriptions that were written by Wikipedia editors. And the first important thing to note when we are discussing the description caption distinction of Wikipedia is their distinction in distribution. So based on 10,000 randomly sampled English language articles, we estimate that about 90% of images have associated captions, but only 6% have an associated alt text. And those 6% still include low quality descriptions that simply consist of the image's file name or are non-English language. So the true coverage of actually useful alt text on English language Wikipedia is therefore much lower than 6%. Is this me?
No.
Okay. I hope you're awake. And this further dramatically highlights the accessibility challenge on the example for Wikipedia. So, but aside from this clear difference in distribution, how do captions and descriptions actually differ semantically? So here's one example from the Wikipedia article on bananas. Shout out to bananas. The caption that appears below the image reads, "Cavendish bananas are the main commercial banana cultivars sold in the world market." And the accessibility description for the image reads, "Grocery store photo of several bunches of bananas." So clearly, the caption would be inappropriate as an accessibility description, and reversely, the description would make an incredibly unhelpful caption. So this reflects some of the expected patterns, but does this actually scale up over the whole data set? In a suite of large-scale analyses based on the naturalistic data, we find very strong evidence that the content of alt descriptions and captions differs in structured ways. For instance, captions most frequently mention events and names like World War or San Francisco. But descriptions talk most frequently about image aesthetics like color photograph, black and white photograph, or descriptive features like dark hair, mustache, etc. Now, what does that mean for potential accessibility models that we train on this data? do trained models actually differ in how descriptive their generated outputs are? So we investigated the description caption effect on 3 different models, 2 LSTM-based models with an attention mechanism, and a transformer model which today still has competitive performance on most image-based text generation tasks. And each model was trained twice. Bless you. Once on the caption data from Concadia, and once on the description data from Concadia. Now, how do they do? So here in each plot, I'm showing the performance of the respective model on description generation on the left and on caption generation on the right. And a higher CIDR score indicates that the texts generated by the models are closer to the original texts from the dataset. So let's look at the results. So across architectures, we found that caption generation, which is here in orange, is significantly more challenging than description generation, which is here in green. And intuitively, this makes sense, because an accessibility description is much more grounded and anchored in the image, since it's meant to replace it. A caption, on the other hand, will contextualize it with, for instance, the year that the picture was taken, which is way less extractable in and of itself. And both tasks therefore pose their own distinct challenges for model development. So until this point, we first established that the content of descriptions and captions differs in structured ways. And now we found that this actually affects how models learn these tasks. But is this actually a distinction that is connected to the text's communicative goal? And secondly, should we expect this to affect the type of models, the type of text that models generate? To investigate these questions, we conducted a pre-registered human subject experiment. And in this experiment, we took images from our dataset and displayed them next to a sample text. So this could be a description or a caption associated with the image, and either the ones from the dataset, so the ones people actually wrote, or the ones generated by the models. So each image was randomly paired up with one of these associated texts, and then we asked 2 questions. The first one is getting at the text's descriptive quality. So how useful would the text alone be to help someone imagine the picture? And the second one is getting at the quality to contextualize and provide non-redundant information. So how much did you learn from the text that you couldn't learn from the image? And the results are very encouraging for our hypothesis. We find that human-written descriptions from Concadia, which are presented here in green, are considered more useful for imagining the picture than captions are, here in orange. On the other hand, people learn more from captions than they do from accessibility descriptions. So now the captions, again here in orange, get the highest ratings. So this is strong support that captions and accessibility descriptions actively optimize for different communicative goals. And this is actually important for models as well. When we show participants the texts generated by the models, the results pattern exactly like the human ratings do, suggesting that models are picking up the nature of this distinction, and it actually affects their downstream performance. So the results from all these analyses, the large data analysis, the model learning analysis, and the controlled human subject experiment, they all suggest that the communicative goal of our utterance changes the information that becomes useful. And it therefore has to become a central component in dataset generation, model development, and evaluation as well. So now we have explored how a distinction in the text communicative goal changes utterance content and the suitability for functioning a priori as accessibility descriptions. But attention to the texts alone, a text goal alone will not suffice. And this is where we come to the second challenge that I will focus on today, namely the image's communicative goal, which matters too. And for that, allow me to introduce you to a theoretical framework for conversation analysis and linguistics called the Kreissian maxims. Who's heard of the Kreissian maxims before? Okay, great. So a lot of people learn new things. That's exciting. So Paul Kreiss put together a set of conversational maxims that we seem to implicitly rely on when we're making communicative choices. And it's probably the most general framework that is used in linguistics to analyze how people interpret rich conversational meaning. One maxim is that we expect others to be truthful and that they have evidence for what they say. But for our purposes, I would like to emphasize the maxim of quantity. The maximum of quantity states, make your contribution as informative as is required for the current purposes of the exchange, and do not make your contribution more informative than is required.
Can we tell Alexa that?
Yeah.
Keeps on rattling.
And here's how this might play out in conversation. So to the question, how far is it still to the bathroom? One could respond, not far, it's across the hallway, turn left, and then 3 doors down. Or one could say, not far. Now, context, or the current purposes of the exchange, mitigates what is appropriate. So in the contextual scenario where I need directions from a stranger, the long and detailed response is appropriate. And in the contextual scenario where a child really needs to use the bathroom and we're already hurrying towards it, the short response is absolutely sufficient. So there are always infinitely many details we could include, but context makes us choose which ones. And I believe this is what's commonly reflected in much recent work, primarily in human-computer interaction, that calls for moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach to non-visual accessibility. So let's explore how this contextual principle similarly applies in visually grounded interactions. And let's return to our motivating example with the image and its visual description and educational sketch of a plant illustrating the shoot system, etc. And that's embedded in a Wikipedia article excuse me, on multimodal pedagogy. So here the purpose of the image is to exemplify complementing visual and linguistic information in one figure to aid learning. And the visual description nicely communicates that. However, the same image could similarly appear in a Wikipedia article on plant anatomy. So here the purpose of the picture is to enable the reader to learn and understand what the different parts of the plant are called and how I can identify them. So now this previous description seems highly insufficient. Imagine that I am a student using this Wikipedia page to practice for an exam. Then this description won't allow me to learn what I need to learn. So instead, I need an image description more like this. A sketch of a plant illustrating the shoot system, which is above the soil, the root system, which is below the soil. Part of the root system are the tap roots and the lateral roots. The tap root refers to the central root, and the lateral roots are the smaller side roots, that, etc., etc., etc. So mentioning the labels now becomes absolutely essential if this text is intended to replace the image and still enable the same communicative function. In the previous article on multimodal pedagogy, listing all of the labels and how they relate to the plant would be distracting, it would be overbearing, it would just be not useful. So the informational selection is fundamentally guided by the communicative goals of the image in that particular context. Currently, image description generation is largely treated as a context-independent problem. The data follows generally a structure where each data point simply consists of a picture and an associated image-based text. And these could be obtained by crawling the web or giving the pictures to people and ask them to describe. Most task-specific models follow the structure we discussed before, where a model receives an image as input and then returns some text. And even for models that can take more complex contextual input, this often remains underexplored since the task itself generally is defined as context-free. And when it comes to the evaluation of generated descriptions, the images and the text are given to a person or a scoring model, which then returns an evaluative score. So in my view, the research area of interest needs to move towards investigating contextual integration into the development pipeline, which is also my personal focus. And the data effort you've actually already seen in this talk. Our Wikipedia-based data set, Concadia, contains very rich contextual information where the image appears. For example, the title of the Wikipedia page and also the closest appearing paragraph to the image. So now that we have the data, we can actually investigate models that can integrate that richer data. So when we investigate how models do when they have access to contextual information during training, it's a very clear picture. Overall, we can recognize the pattern from earlier that description generation seems largely more successful than caption generation across conditions. Providing an image's context during training in the form of either a closely occurring paragraph or the corresponding caption or description improves performance throughout model architectures. And providing models with an unrelated context paragraph during training doesn't lead to performance improvements, suggesting that the improvements for all model architectures that are due to the content are actually due to the content of the context and not just additional linguistic input. So these brief results are a first indication for the value that context awareness can add to goal-oriented image description generation tasks. So now I spend most of this talk and most of my time on how we can make models better, be it through better data or changes to the information that they receive to generate image descriptions. However, there's another very crucial component for model development, which is actually the evaluation of those models. And I will talk about this important aspect for the rest of the talk. So the problem of model evaluation in simplest terms is the following. If I have two models that differ in some way, how do I know that model 1 is better or worse than model 2? And there are different ways in which you can evaluate whether a model is improving. The most straightforward way is probably asking people. So participants will be recruited and they have to judge, are these image descriptions good or not good? So for the first one, they might say, yay, this is great. And for the second one, no, this is very bad. And then I do this over many examples, and then I can say, holistically, model 2 is judged as performing worse compared to model 1. And if done well, that's a big if done well, this is incredibly effective. However, it's also costly and it takes a long time. So for that reason, evaluation by human subjects is usually just performed when we're basically done developing the model. It's not feasible to do that whenever we make a small tweak to a model, slightly change the data, etc. So we have to rely on other metrics that we hope approximate people's ratings to a reasonable degree. And a new popular way of doing this is the following. Suppose you have a very powerful model which has learned to associate texts with images and the way that they occur online. Now, wouldn't it be just great if we could just give the model an image and a description, and then it would just tell us how good it is? And this is the general logic of so-called reference-less metrics. And ClipScore is the most promising one of those. It's already being widely adopted in model development, with multiple papers arguing that ClipScore has the best alignment with human ratings compared to all alternatives. However, there's actually no straightforward way of integrating the context the image is in into the evaluation pipeline. In our work, we specifically wanted to put this to the test. How much does context matter in practice? So first, we created a data set where we explicitly focus on the case where images are part of a larger context. For instance, we took an image of a church and then placed it in a variety of Wikipedia articles, like building material, Christian cross, or roof. And we then recruited sighted participants on Amazon's Mechanical Turk and presented them with these contextualized images and asked them to write a description that would make it accessible to blind and low vision users. So now we have descriptions that are actually written for images appearing in broader contexts. And those descriptions were then evaluated by sighted as well as blind and low vision users. To facilitate a better understanding of what constitutes a good image description in context, we chose a multi-dimensional evaluation framework based on pragmatic principles of communication. I can say more about that later. And sighted participants answered this set of questions twice, once before and once after the image was revealed to them. And blind and low vision, or BLV participants, answered the questions once and then proceeded to answer a set of open-ended quality questions, which I'm happy to talk more about later as well. So before we move to comparing the human ratings with ClipScore, let me first take a brief moment, to compare the data we got from the sighted participants here on the y-axis and the BLV participants here on the x-axis. Overall, we see good correlations across questions between both participant groups at about 0.5 to 0.6. But I want to zoom into two additional findings here. First, we find that hiding the image from sighted participants does not improve their alignment with BLV participants. Instead, we see that correspondence increases when sighted users actually can see the image. And secondly, we also identify a scenario where the ratings from BLB participants and sighted participants come apart. The ratings of sighted participants remain unchanged, independent of description length. However, the BLB participants in our sample show a very strong preference for longer over shorter descriptions, really highlighting the importance of direct work with BLB users for system design. Now let's move back to the main question. Can contextless metrics, like clip score, be used to guide the development of AI systems for accessibility? So for each descriptions, we have ratings from people for how good it is, and a rating from clip score. And if clip score is a useful evaluation metric, we should see a good correlation, which might look something like this. This. So as the clip score ratings increase, the human ratings should increase. All right, now to the results. We actually found that clip score ratings show no correlation at all with human ratings on our data. And that's true for both sighted as well as blind and low vision participants. So as soon as we enable people to judge a description within a context an image appeared in, the correlation with clip score vanished. Now since CLIP, the vision and language model that clip score is based on, there have been an unspeakable number of new and improved vision language models. So in a recent study, we investigated the general promise of using them as proxies for human participants. We tested a wide range of current state-of-the-art vision language models and first correlated them with ratings from participants on a new naturalistic dataset we collected. And across the board, the Pearson correlations with human ratings are high. So simply based on correlational evidence, we might consider this a success. However, we show that actually all models have categorical and non-human-like biases in their score assignment. We introduced 10 data augmentations that should necessarily lower the assigned score of the description and find that none of the tested models actually passes them all. For instance, consider this image description, a dog with big ears, and let's suppose a model had given it a good rating. Simply repeating the description twice, as in a dog with big ears, a dog with big ears, results in a much higher assigned score than without the repetition. And similarly, simply adding elephants are the largest existing land animals after any description tends to improve the assigned score. So this work really highlights that artificial agents are still not appropriate replacements for human evaluation, however sophisticated they might currently seem for generation. So in sum, saying something about an image seems easy, but choosing the right things to say is highly complex and depends on many pragmatic and social factors. And this requires highly interdisciplinary efforts of fields like computer science, human-computer interaction, linguistics, psychology, communication, and many more, which can lead us to novel insights about multimodal communication and automatic generation systems for non-visual accessibility that can seamlessly integrate with user needs. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the questions and the panel, which I think is the next thing on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Receiving questions?
No, let's go ahead and take questions while we get the panel up there, so.
Sounds good.
In parallel.
Okay, so it's a little cheating. Oh wait, is there a
Okay,
question?
can we go to the online question after this one audience question?
Yes.
Great, okay, then let's do that. I'll come back to you, I won't forget to.
So I think a lot about designing the output of generative AI models.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you've talked about is, one way of thinking about it is essentially that. So if you kind of know what the communicative intent that you're trying to achieve, you can better do that. But what I thought was interesting is toward the end, you said something about, but getting kind of humans involved in, I don't think you used the word design, but I might use the word design, is expensive and it takes a lot of effort and whatever else. And so we may have to do this automated thing. Whereas I might argue that there's no free lunch, and actually we have to do the hard thing. And I wonder what you think about that.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I never meant to argue, I should clarify this. I never meant to argue that this is a matter of replacement. It's not a matter of replacement. I do think that humans and users who are actually affected need to be a central part of that pipeline. It is a reality that we need intermediate goalposts in between, and I think that's an important parallel effort to make those intermediate goalposts that we can use for quick system evaluation instead of, the important ones that are significant milestones that have to integrate people, but we need those individual ones in between as well. They also need to properly represent people. They're not a replacement, but we need them as intermediate steps for model development on the fly. And I think in that sense, it's a very important thing to be thinking about. Does that address your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Can I take the question that was over Zoom? Okay, do you want to ask the question again over Zoom?
Great question.
Yes. Do you want to ask the
So-
question? Yeah, go ahead.
When we available with ChatGPT voice only and Be My Eyes app or ChatGPT app,
I think we lost you. Maybe you can write it in the chat, and it seems like that would be a great question also for our panel, that we have more experts on that as well. So yeah, please write it in the chat and then we can address it in the panel.
Fabulous. So at this point, we'll go ahead and ask your question about there's
Because I know in the language test, they are using a reward modeling of the human preference, but in this is just a click-score, and most of the VLM, they don't use like reward modeling train or fine-tune. So is it possible to maybe train a reward model based on the image and text and replace the human as their evaluation issues?
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting to evaluate. I mean, currently it's also a question how you're then getting the score out of the model, and we find that actually the strongest biases don't come from the models themselves, but actually from the way that you're extracting the score. So in the paper that I discussed here very briefly, we specifically compared similarity-based metrics, so where you actually work on the representation space that the model learned itself, versus you work with the log likelihood to get the score based on the probability of getting the generated description based on the image, the context, and condition that it's a good description. We find that the method of extraction is actually way more important and influential than the model training specifics in the first place. So I think there's a lot of work that's still needed on actually extracting the scoring method as well, but I'm happy to talk more about that. But I definitely think model learning approaches are also an important method that needs further research there.
So I think at this point we'll switch to a panel question. You can still ask your question, but we'll just switch to panel session. So if we can have all the invited speakers come sit down.
And feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk more also. Thank you.